Good morning, everyone. I'll be reporting number 3 Undertone sound for Team Taiwan. So here's the problem statement. We're to allow a tuning fork or another simple oscillator to vibrate against the sheet of paper with a weak contact between them. The frequency of the resulting sound will have a lower frequency than that of the tuning fork's fundamental frequency. We're to investigate this phenomenon. So I believe the focus of this report is to first design a setup that allows for consistent weak contact between the tuning fork and paper, and then investigate what causes the production of the undertone sound. Then we can investigate how relevant graphs affect the resulting acoustic output. Next, this is my outline of my report. I'll begin with an introduction, explaining why the phenomenon occurs, and defining what weak contact means. Then I'll have a preliminary modeling our system as a forced harmonic oscillator, then testing for the damping and elastic constant of paper, and showing you my simulation results. Then I'll be testing the distance between the tuning fork and paper, as well as the length of the paper. And then I'll be modifying my theory to include the bending motion of the paper, and then giving us a new equation of motion, as well as a new simulation result. Then I'll end with my conclusion. So introduction. I'll be defining weak contact as where two rigid bodies collide but don't synchronize. This means that the paper must directly contact the tuning fork. However, the force exerted by the paper on the tuning fork cannot be too large that the paper becomes an added mass onto the tuning fork and oscillates with the tuning fork. And in order to ensure the strength, to maintain the constant strength of contact between the tuning fork and paper, we use the micrometer to adjust the distance between our 1 centimeter width wide poker card and the tuning fork. And we use it, our experiment apparatus has an adjustable height, so we can control the contact point between the tuning fork and the paper. And we use an electromagnet to drive our tuning fork in order to prevent the decay of the tuning fork and to further control our initial condition. Then we use a vernier sound probe to test the resulting frequency of our undertones. So here is how we analyze. We performed a Fourier fast Fourier transformation on all our sound spectrums. And this is the graph of the FFT without any undertone, and it's just purely the natural frequency of the tuning fork. And this is what a graph will look like with undertones. So we believe that the reason undertones are produced is due to the collisions between the paper and tuning fork, and due to the oscillations of the paper. And once the paper oscillates, it will have a lower frequency than the undertone, than the tuning fork, because no matter how fast you push it, because the paper is less elastic, has a greater elastic constant than the tuning fork, it will swing back slower, meaning the frequency of the paper will always be lower than the tuning fork. And because the collisions and how frequent the tuning fork collides with the paper, we will hear the undertone due to the paper pushing the surrounding air. And for example, this is just a simple animation showing the paper and the motion of the paper and tuning fork. For example, if every 2 times the tuning fork oscillates and the paper hits it once, we will have an undertone of 1/2 the natural frequency. And we can see this when we track the motion of the paper and the tuning fork. And we can see that for every 3 times the tuning fork oscillates, the paper will hit it once, giving us an undertone frequency of 1/3 the natural frequency. However, one interesting phenomenon we see from this graph is that the motion of the paper is not exactly smooth. There's a small dip at the top. And then we can see that every time the paper swings back, it dips in slightly and then gets pushed back and then goes back. And then we can explain this probably because of the air that the tuning fork pushes. For example, when the tuning fork oscillates here, it pushes a small amount of air that causes the small dip. And however, the tuning fork does not always, the paper does not always oscillate in a periodic manner. There's 3 cases of oscillation: the pure periodic case, the semi-periodic case, and the non-periodic case. And if we see the motion of the paper, the tuning fork and the motion of the paper, the pure periodic case means that the paper hits the tuning fork at the same time every time it oscillates, with the same initial velocity, leaving the tuning fork. And because if we have this case, for example, every 3 times the tuning fork oscillates, the paper hits it once, we will see every 4 times we will see an undertone frequency of 1/4, and the 2/4 and 3/4 might be overtones of the undertone. And here is a semi-periodic case. Although the paper does not hit the tuning fork at the same time every oscillation, after a certain cycle or a certain number of collisions, the paper will go back to its original condition and hit the paper at the same place and the same condition, giving us multiple undertone frequencies that are fractions of the natural frequency. And this is a non-periodic case where the paper cannot reach a stable node, meaning it might be between two stable nodes, giving it an unstable condition. And it will collide with the tuning fork at different places every time, giving us no, and in the FFT, it will be distributed as noise. So starting with our preliminary model, we modeled our paper as a cantilever beam in mode 1. And we can write this equation of forced harmonic oscillator with B as a damping coefficient of the paper and K as the elastic constant of the paper. And this will be the momentum of the paper, in which we turn on with a direct delta function at the time of collision at T prime. So at T prime, the velocity of the paper is in the opposite direction of the velocity of the fork. And immediately after the collision, the paper will move in the same direction as the fork. And to test the damping coefficient of the paper, we track the motion of the paper after flicking it once. And we can get that by plotting the piece and fitting it to an exponential function. We can get that the damping coefficient will be this. We repeated this many times and got the same value. In order to test the elastic coefficient of the paper, we tied a string to the end of our paper and then fix the other end to the balance. And then by pulling on it, we can estimate the elastic constant of paper by testing the force it exerts on the balance. And here are our simulation results when we modeled this. And this is the motion of the paper, and this is the motion of the tuning fork. We can see that for every three times the tuning fork oscillates, the paper will hit it once, giving us every 2 times, giving us the undertone frequency of 1/2 the natural frequency. And here's my experimentation. So in my experiment setup, when I move the paper inwards, I'll be increasing the distance here, which means that as this distance increases, the effective amplitude the tuning fork gives the paper increases, meaning that the paper will receive a larger force from the tuning fork. And this is my experiment, and this is my simulation results. And we can see that in the first phase, the two results are similar in that they all have the undertone frequency of 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4. However, once it transitions into an unstable mode between two stable nodes, the paper will, in our experiment, we will see a period of chaos and instability, and we believe that this is due to the bending motion of paper. Since the paper does not always bend in mode 1 of the cantilever beam, it will hit the tuning fork at different locations, giving us this more non-periodic motion. And we can see that as we increase distance or change distance, we move the paper closer or further away from the phase boundary between the stability conditions. And here, when we tested the length of the paper, so the shorter the paper, the more stiff and the lesser the mass of the paper is. And the longer the paper, the more elastic and greater the mass it is. And as we hit it, the shorter paper will have a greater velocity than the longer paper, but then its displacement will be less. So because of this, the shorter paper will have a greater frequency than the longer paper. So, however, since the paper must always tend to the closest stable node, we can see that in a certain period, the undertone frequency will always be 1/2. However, after transitioning from one stable node to another, that we will see undertone frequencies of 1/3 and 2/3. And this will be the frequency of the resulting sound, and the color indicates the intensity. And comparing this to our simulation, we can see that the simulation gives us similar trends in that in the certain area in the first part, at shorter lengths, we have an undertone frequency of 1/2, and later on we have undertone frequencies of 1/3 and 2/3. And however, we didn't model the bending motion of the paper yet, so we modified our theoretic model. So in order to model the flexibility of paper, instead of using one piece of paper, we cut up our segments into different pieces so we can further model the bending motion of paper. And we connected each segment in our computer simulation with a strong spring force, and then we modeled the elasticity with negative k theta depending on the position of the paper at each second. And we used Euler's method to model the collisions, and we still use the same force equation as we used previously. And now we have a new equation of motion, and we need to consider the new gravitational force, as long as the connecting force in between each segment. And when the paper collides with the tuning fork, we have a new collision force. And we will also have the torque on the paper that we calculated using this equation. And this will be the simulation results, which we can see that as the motion of the paper will be will bend, and the position of the paper will still follow a oscillation. And when we tested different contact points, we can see that different contact points, in the first phase, we will have stable nodes, and the paper will oscillate in a stable periodic manner. However, once we the contact point is closer to the top, our paper will behave in a non-periodic manner. And we believe that this is due to the bending of the paper, and we can see this in our simulation once we accounted for the bending. However, even though we accounted for the bending in the last phase, we are still unable to see a periodic motion because we only modeled our bending in 2 dimensions, and the twisting might be in 3 dimensions. And we can see that in our simulation, it models the bending of the paper, and when we contact it here, the modes the paper shows is still in lower modes, and we can still use our bending model. However, when we contact it closer to the top, the bending modes will be higher, and the motion of the paper will be more complicated, which means that the paper will hit the tuning fork at different locations each time, at different contact points. So next, I'll end with my conclusion. So we believe that recontact is where they collide but don't synchronize, and the reason that undertone frequencies are produced is due to the collisions and the oscillations of the paper pushing the surrounding air. However, we have 3 cases of oscillation, which is the pure periodic case, the semi-periodic case, and the non-periodic case. And the oscillation paper will tend to the closest stable node, so we will see phase transitions between our graphs. And the distance will be equal to the effective amplitude, and we tested for the length and contact chord. And we started with a simple model that is just a forced harmonic oscillator, but this does not model the bending, so we adjusted our simulation and our model to model how the bending motion of the paper goes. And this will be why the undertone frequencies occur. Thank you.
Thank you. Question of the opponent?
Okay, thank you for your presentation. My first question, what do we really hear as an undertone? So is it the tap of the tuning fork, or is it the movement of the paper?
The movement.
The movement of the paper, right? We will discuss later. Then, can you just name the sampling rate of your microphone? The sampling rate of your microphone, can you just name it?
0.033.
So it's a suitable amount of fluid to get those results. But yeah, it would be nice if you know it, if you know how your measured setup, how your experiment setup works. Well, then the next question, you measured the distance between.
Sorry. The clock.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, you measured the distance between paper and translated the whole time. Did I notice that right?
No, we only tested for different distances for one experiment.
So, and had you fixed
we fixed the
distance for each beginning of the experiment?
We fixed the distance for other experiments.
Okay. Then the next question, because the task says reach contact, and did you estimate on such a force that is acting to the paper when the tuning fork collides?
We estimated the distance. A range of distance for.
But can you just name a force? Because when the paper collides with when the tuning fork collides with the paper, there is transmitted an impulse, so there is a force acting. Can you estimate that? Did you estimate that?
No, we did.
Okay. Then you suspended the paper only on one edge in your experiments, right? So it behaves the paper then either than a bar or either than a string. So what is a paper like? Is a paper something like a rod? Or is it something like we use
poker cards, so it's more stiff? However, the paper is
okay, so you use the very, very thick material. So then I believe it is something like a bar.
Any more seconds?
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, my last question. You had some. You had something like collisions between the paper and tuning fork. What exactly is the velocity of the paper after the collision?
But that depends on where it collides.
But a formula, there has to be a formula. So was it an elastic collision that you assumed?
We assume elastic collision.
And you assumed elastic collision. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. 2 minutes calculation time.
Right, so hello, my name is Saskia. I'm from Germany, and I'm today the opponent of the problem with the energy itself. First, let's have a look on the report itself shortly. So there was given definition of weak contact, what the task requires, and there was also a very good visualization by many animations for the different occurrences of undertones. But there was quite unclear definition of stability, so that's a point, stability of the system, what we want to discuss later. And there wasn't really clear what is a paper like. So is it something like a bar, where I now noticed after the clarifying questions that she used a very thick paper, so we can assume this paper either more like a bar than a string. Then there was no clear explanation why the undertones have to be exact 1/n of the frequency of the tuning fork, which will be hopefully also become clearer after the discussion. And a very important point is that the origin of the sound is quite unclear. So we will discuss also if it is really the movement of the paper, so the frequency of the paper itself, what we can hear, or more the tapping of the tuning fork that we can hear. And there wasn't shown a theory experiment comparison, unfortunately. But when we take a look on the experiments in detail, then we can say that there was a very suitable experimental setup, because the reporter used electromagnetic drive to control the distance, or the amplitude of the tuning fork, and she also used a high-speed camera, although she unfortunately couldn't name the sampling rate of the microphone she also used, so that was the lack of the knowledge of her experimental setup she used. And there was also another good point that a systematic variation of the distance between the oscillator and the paper was done, but nevertheless there were some parameters missing or not varied, which was, for instance, this paper thickness, because a paper usually isn't a card or such a cartoon she used, so it is more, it could also be a thin paper, and then maybe the phenomenon would be different. And so the most important parameter is the burn variable, the paper thickness and the material, and the suspension wasn't very true, so it was always suspended only on one end, but a paper could be also suspended on two ends. To the theory, there was a qualitative explanation for the occurrence of undertone using the ratio between the frequencies of the paper and of the oscillator. And there was a simulation that could predict the trajectories of the oscillator and of the paper, and there was a theoretical calculation of the velocity of the paper for each time step via the simulation. So although some assumptions were unclear, because we want to discuss if the paper really follows Hooke's law, and there were some boundary conditions which we will see later, because the boundary conditions of the simulation were quite unclear, and the propagations of waveforms in the paper itself weren't taken into account, what we clearly see in the measurement results, and there was, as already said, no direct comparison between theory and experiment. Well, and when we look back to the task, then we can see that the task was fulfilled quite well, although there wasn't used enough simple oscillator as one could have done, but weak contact and also the phenomenon itself was investigated quite well, and we want now to start with the discussion. My first point would be to what we hear really, because that is, the task states that we have to hear a lower frequency, and now I want to hear what is this lower frequency. Maybe it becomes clearer when we just illustrate it. So you have a time and a position of the paper, so maybe x, and now the tuning fork oscillates harmonically, and the paper does something like that. So, and you stated now that we hear the movement of the paper, right? So I ask you in the clarifying questions.
I want to clarify that it's the movement of the paper pushing the air that we hear.
So
For example,
you're pressing on the laser pointer, so we can't.
Okay. So for when we hear the sound of the tuning fork, it's because of the tuning fork pushing the air due to its oscillations. And I believe that the undertone is due to the paper's oscillations.
Okay. But now the paper has a certain Iypt frequency. So okay, now you include friction here. It is without friction, and when the paper will move further after distillation, then it had here a certain Iypt frequency. But what we can hear as an undertone is, I think, 1/3, because it is. No, what? Yeah. Here we hear 1/3. 1/3 of the Iypt frequency is achieved. But what is the frequency of the paper?
The frequency, if we test it experimentally, it's 18.46 hertz.
Can you just name a ratio? In this case,
18. Okay, I divide 226 by 18.46. I don't have an exact number, but the frequency, natural frequency of my paper is 18.46 hertz.
okay, but my point I don't agree with this. First, we made a mistake. I'm sorry. Yeah, the paper is not here; it is here, so this has to be 2. And now,
here.
sorry, now I'm confused. But when the paper would hit here, then it would hit every oscillation. So then it would be a 1, I think. So you agree that here has to stay at 2. I'm sorry. That's one part. And now the Iypt frequency of this paper is not 1/2, it is 1/4. Do you agree? Yes. You just take this.
Yes.
And that's why, in my opinion, we can't hear the movement of the paper, so we don't hear the Iypt frequency of the paper. We hear just those periodic taps when the tuning fork hits the paper.
But then the tapping creates a different sound that shouldn't be, that has a different frequency. It shouldn't have the frequency of the.
Not the frequency of the tap itself when it hits the paper, but we
Because
just hear this periodic change of velocity when the paper is driven away, but we don't hear this periodic movement due to the Iypt frequency of the paper. That's what I wanted to clarify, because then the undertone would be 1/4, would 1/4.
Because in our analysis, we analyze the frequency, and the tapping does not create the frequency.
I just think we have to use to move on to another point. My next point, you used a very nice simulation to describe the movement of the paper, and you showed a video of the simulation on slide 31, I think. 30. Then 30. One before, it was right at the end. 30, please.
Essentially.
Yeah, this video I wanted to see. Here in the right video, it seems to me that the paper moves on both ends. Is that right?
The paper should not move on that end, but because that's this. But we used a spring force to contact it. But basically, we're saying that when we contact the paper closer to the top, the motion of the paper will be more chaotic and not as still.
But you agree to me
Yes,
that
I agree that it should not move.
there
on the
should be a boundary condition that the paper is suspended on one and fixed.
Yes.
Can't
Yes.
move.
Yes.
Well, so that's why now. Now my point, or I have now a problem with this simulation results, because this what we can here see when the paper is free on both ends. The Iypt frequency of the paper.
Okay,
will be
I stand
different.
corrected. The paper should not be free on both ends.
Okay, but then I have to. Can be sure that your frequencies or your Iypt frequencies that you determine for your paper are right. Because why happen such results?
This model does not. The simulation does not run at the same time as this animation. This animation is ran separately using the same.
Okay, now I'm confused. So, did you use some simulation results to determine this
Yes.
frequency of
Yes,
the
this is the simulation results. And the
But
modeling the
you
simulation.
stated now that your simulation result is quite poor, because the paper can't move on both ends.
Okay, for the most part, we are using contact points of less than 7 centimeters.
Okay, well,
Yes, and
then
I
you say
agree-
that your
yes.
simulation
No.
is right, but in
No,
this...
I agree that the
No.
7 centimeter contact point should not be moving on both ends.
Well, okay, I have to disagree now to this point that the simulation is
I
very
think
good.
only the video is wrong.
Yeah, because we have some natural results, and yeah, we can't believe now that this simulation results are true. But then on slide 17, I think, Yeah, you showed the deflection of the paper over the force, the deflection for the applied force. Here you have 4 data points.
We have 5.
Well, when you have now a large displacement, how would this graph behave? So in which range can you observe Hooke's law?
We believe that yes, I agree that once the displacement exceeds a certain amount, we cannot. However, we can see that the displacement of the paper right now is very small. And then it is linear.
So
we
you
can use
your
Hooke's law.
measurements were also only in this
Yes.
range. Okay.
Because our paper will not oscillate in an amplitude greater than that.
Okay, then I agree to this method. And what would happen now when we increase the contact between this contacting force between oscillator and paper? So when you just press the tuning fork really against it.
That is what we did in our experiment, changing the distance.
But then I think you were out of this range. So
Did I go out of this range?
here, what did you do
So
there?
this is the position of at 0 millimeters. It means that the paper is like touching the tuning fork without
Okay.
oscillation.
Yeah.
And then so we can see that at a distance before that, the tuning fork will start hitting the paper.
Yeah.
And so this will be this point. And then we will push the paper further onto the tuning fork.
But then I think you aren't in this range of Hooke's law, right?
No, we are, because this is still at the maximum 3 millimeters. And then our Hooke's law graph exceeds 3 millimeters. That just
okay,
is
then I didn't saw it right. But nevertheless, my
This is
question
greater
was,
than 3 millimeters.
okay, I'm sorry. Nevertheless, my question was, what would happen when you really press the tuning fork against the paper? So which influence on the undertone frequency has this distance between oscillator and paper?
Yeah, as we can see in that graph, the distance graph on page 20, that as we push the paper on the tuning fork, the same thing as tuning fork pushing on the paper, right?
Yeah.
And we can see that as we continue pushing it, we will see this.
So you have, do I understand it right? At the beginning you have
We have
one undertone
yeah.
of 1/4,
Yes.
then 1 whole.
Yes, and then in this motion, we believe that as we press too hard on it, the motion of the paper will start bending, which is why we modified our original model.
Now my intention with this law is now that we aren't in the range of Hooke's law, because when you say that the spring constant, or when you can apply Hooke's law, then there is no reason why the eigenfrequency of the paper should change. And you agree to me that the frequency of the undertones depends on the frequency on the eigenfrequency of the paper, right? And now when we doesn't change the eigenfrequency, why should we see a change?
We're only using Hooke's law to measure the elastic constant of paper. And in this simple model, we're modifying like our paper will be oscillating like this, right? But in our simple model, we didn't consider different modes that paper might be in. For example, they might oscillate like this. So our oscillation is just between these 2 points.
Yeah, I believe we do that.
So we modeled the elastic constant for this particular model, meaning that we only use the model for this range.
Yeah, but nevertheless, my opinion is in this graph, we shouldn't see a change in the frequency when we are in the range of Hooke's law, because then the eigenfrequency of the paper doesn't change. So we would only expect a change when the
a model of the force power oscillator, not using the eigenfrequency.
Time for the discussion is over.
Thank you for your discussion. Now, to summarize it shortly, we first discussed the origin of sound, which is, in my opinion, a very important point for this project. And I wanted to clarify that we hear those undertones of 1/4 in this example of the eigenfrequency of the tuning fork, which is really this pushing away of the paper, and not this periodic movement of the paper, because then the eigenfrequency wouldn't be 1/4, it would be 1/4. Then we discussed something about this simulation results, where there were some full videos where the paper moves on both ends. Further we discussed now how Hooke's law, or when you can apply Hooke's law for a paper. And yeah, here the report is stated that Hooke's that she were in the range of Hooke's law the whole time, but now I have got a problem with the results because I would expect when Hooke's law applies the whole time, then the ID frequency of the paper will change. Thank you for
Thank you. Questions of the reviewer?
Right. This is a question to the reporter. So did you change the fixation of the paper at all, or
No.
consider it in your model? All right. Why do you consider that the cantilever beam is an adequate mold for vibrations of paper?
It's not an adequate mode, that's why we modified our simulation and.
So did you consider, for example, plate vibrations in similar models in your
Plane vibration.
plate? Okay, thank you. Did you look at the orientation of the paper or change the actual full dimensions of the paper at all?
We changed the length of the paper.
Did you look at the thickness of the paper?
No.
All right. How did you limit your signal noise? I see all of your slides are very, very clear, which seems almost unnatural for what you're doing here, especially since it's a microphone measurement.
What do you mean?
How did you get rid of the signal noise?
Oh,
Background noise.
we tested background noise and we subtracted the background noise.
All right. Did you consider overtones? Do you see overtones in your graphs of the undertone
Yes,
of the
we did.
paper?
Yes, we did.
Right? Did you measure the position or the sound? Really? Did you measure? Because I see you measure videos and then I see you state microphone. So did you measure position or sound?
When we changed the contact point, we changed the microphone with our contact point.
Okay, but you
It's-
have videos. You measured position there.
Yes.
Okay. What output does your simulation give? How does it give sound?
It gives this the motion of wave, which we took the FFT away, which gives us the frequencies.
So it gives you the wave. Okay, a question to the opponent. What would be the source of sound in this case? How does the sound transfer? How do you hear the sound?
As already stated, when the paper is pushed away in a very short time, then we have got a change in the velocity of the air, and which causes a change of pressure. In
Air,
the end,
so
we of
paper,
course
thank you. Paper acts as a speaker, and it's not. Is it then you hearing the points of like it hitting together, or you hearing the paper
we
acting?
hear every time when the paper is pushed away in a very short time, and this causes a wave of pressure in the air.
All right, thank you. Question to the opponent. Do you consider the beam, what do you consider is better for modeling paper, beam or plate vibrations?
Yeah, it really depends on the suspension. In this case, when the paper is standing on one edge and is deflected here, then it is okay to use a beam, but otherwise when it is suspended, it would be better to consider a string or also a membrane.
String.
That is.
All right, thank you. Did you would you consider plate vibration would give better results for this phenomenon?
With plane, just to clarify, plane vibrations, you mean that they are waves inside the paper itself, or?
All right. Question to the reporter. Which range did you measure the elastic force in?
Short answer, please, time is over.
Range of measurement of the elastic force, please.
0.2 something, 0.4.
Millimeters of displacement. Yes.
Okay, thank you, time is over.
And today I'll be reviewing problem number 3, undertone sound, 14 Croatia. So to start with the problem text, the problem states that we should allow a tuning fork or another simple oscillator to vibrate against a sheet of paper with weak contact, and we're to investigate the phenomenon of what happens here, how it all works. We heard it already. Regarding the, oh my god, so, okay. Regarding the reporter's theory, the pros fit are the definition of weak contact, which is fairly good, and the consideration of bending of paper. But I believe they missed some points with using the cantilever beam, since paper is a sheet and it's much more complex than a simple beam. And in using a purely velocity-based system, from what I understood, with no real energy conservation from what I saw in the model. Also, I saw some diagrams of velocities, but in the forms I didn't see any coefficient of restitution or anything similar that would actually describe the collisions a bit better using the velocities. Also, the sound formation definition in the presentation was slightly weak, though better explained in later discussion, which I commend. Regarding the experiment, the pros are the good measurement of dynamics, loads of data, different variables, and the identification of the like different types of modes, seeing the ground state, seeing the oscillation, how it works. That was really good from you. But you could have used different types of paper, and you did miss the aspect of thickness of paper, which is fairly important for how these oscillations work, because if you have a paper this thick, it will be very, very strict. Regarding results and conclusion, there was a clear presentation of how the phenomenon works through nice animations and in the graphs of data, and as I mentioned already, the measurement of parameters. But there was a very weak explanation of the noise removal or the source of the source or FFT, or how they actually got the data. And from experience, the graphs looked a bit too clear from noise, but that's fine. The simulation also in certain slides was separate from animation, and they seemed slightly confused of the source of data, with the opponent noticing the video not syncing with really what they were showing in the simulation slides. Also, there was some discrepancies between simulations and mode statements, such as their videos and simulations showing higher modes of vibration, while they were stating that they only simulated the base modes of vibration for what they were doing. Moving on to the opponent, commendations for noticing the missing parameters and the suspension problems, which are really important. And good discussion with solid explanations and teamwork along with error correcting. The cons are the theory of comparison was present that you mentioned, was it? And you were wrong in certain points, but you correct yourselves, and you could consider a better mode than a string for this. Regarding the discussion, the source of sound, we consider it a speaker and disagree with the opponent. Determination of the undertone, we agree with the opponent that with the determination of the undertone on which the reporter got confused. The change of frequency due to amplitude, we agree with the reporter that the paper gains more energy as the amplitude is higher, because then there's more velocity in the fork to hit it stronger. Regarding linearity, I agree with the reporter that it follows Hooke's law for small displacement. But for strong context, I would agree with the opponent that it would be way stronger. And regarding suspension of paper, they had that weird situation with the free and where it should be fixed. Thank you very much.
Concluding remarks of the reporter.
So thank you, reviewer and the opponent, for your remarks. So first, I want to summarize what I was saying. So I define weak contact as the collision where they collide but they don't synchronize. And I believe that the paper oscillates with a fractional frequency and causes the undertone. And we investigated 3 different cases of oscillation. And here, in the beginning, I used a simple model of the forced harmonic oscillator to model the motion of the paper as a cantilever beam. However, I did notice that the paper does bend and does not always behave like that. So I modified my theory in the end to simulate the different bending of the different segments of the paper, so I can further accurately model the motion of the paper. And we did test we used Hooke's law. However, we do believe that it is valid for the small displacements we are using, as seen from our experiments. It is linear, and we tested the effect caused by the change in the distance, the length, and the contact point. And the opponent mentioned that we didn't have any, or the reviewer mentioned that we didn't have any comparison between the theory and experiment, but in our graphs we showed that the simulation on this side and the experiment on this side, and we compared how they matched. And the sampling of our microphone is 48,000, and if the paper is clamped on both sides, we believe that the standing wave will occur. And the eigen frequency, we believe that is irrelevant to the phenomenon, because the paper never completes one oscillation, meaning that it would never show the eigen frequency of the paper. And the planar wave on the paper is hard to model, so we simplified our model to only the vibrational modes. And we assumed that every collision is elastic, and it seems to match our theory well. So thank you to the opponent and the reviewer for leading to some deeper understanding and for the phenomenon.
And now questions for the jury, 5 minutes.
To all 3, please. If you have a signal of impulses, say, separated by 1 second, just an infinite signal like this, what would the FFT or Fourier transform of this look like? If you can draw it on like a schematic graph of this, that would be great.
Just impulses.
Yes.
So a Fourier transform will give you a
Just
nice...
give me a drawing, please.
Excuse me, sinusoidal impulses.
Just impulses, separated by a fixed gap.
Okay.
Just go ahead. I know.
That's schematic.
Because for a sine wave, the Fourier transform gives like a nice peak.
We just
Thank
see the
you.
pictures.
Thank you. Just want to see the pictures.
Okay, then.
Can you move so that you can see?
Oh. Oh wait, my axes are.
Okay. Maybe the next question.
Okay, so this question is for the reporter. I have a question about slide 15. Actually, no, sorry, just now, 33 was okay. Let's go to slide 33. Okay, 15, now it's here. So, what is on the right-hand side of the equation? Is it mass times acceleration, or it does that
This
delta?
is delta
let me
V,
finish
delta
my
V, so
question.
impulse.
So,
Impulse and direct delta.
so you have velocity times the Dirac delta.
Yeah, I have the mass times the change in velocity times the direct delta.
Does that give you effectively mass times acceleration?
Yes. No, this is the change.
Sorry,
Impulse
maybe
and-
you help me understand. So on the left-hand side, the units are probably mass times acceleration.
Mhm.
And on the right-hand side, do I also get mass times acceleration?
Yeah, this is mass and velocity. And then we get time numbers.
That's a Dirac delta.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
For Saskia. You said that, you suggested that the card in Karen's experiment, I think in your words, exceeded Hooke's law. So can you justify that, and how, are you saying that it went past its elastic limit, and how would that have appeared?
Yeah, the reporter showed us this graph of deflection, independence on the applied force, and here it was linear. But then, if the deflection would be higher, then this reversing force gets stronger, something like that. And my intention was now that where she showed the results from the undertone, and when we have such a movement, this is the shitting fork, and then a movement of the paper, and when Hooke's law is valid, then this movement of the paper wouldn't change. But she observed that there is a change of undertone, and that's why I expected that we are already in this range where we have got a higher reversing force of the paper, and that's why we hear another undertone.
So sorry, just to ask a quick follow-up question. So do you think the force of the tuning fork is great enough to permanently deform the card?
Yes. So it is an elastic collision. But this is another measurement. This was just done, I think, with a force meter and measuring the deflection.
Okay, thank you. Will?
I have a question for the opponent. You guys spent a lot of time talking about what the actual source of the sound is. Can you tell me how your understanding differs from her understanding of what the source of the sound is?
My problem was that she stated that the movement of the paper causes the undertone. And now a paper has S and bar, or a string and a certain eigenfrequency. And this eigenfrequency isn't the frequency that we hear in the other.
I just want to know how yours was different than hers. Do you agree with what she thinks your difference in idea about this?
No, I think that what she's saying is the same thing as what I'm saying, except that she is trying to use the word eigenfrequency, which I don't believe occurs in my system. So, because the...
Okay,
All right, thank you.
the time is basically up to the jury questions. And now we have infinite.
That's
They are all.
I meant
Okay, so we can show our scores first for the reporter. I'm going to start it from me, so please bring your points. 6, 6, 8, 6, and 5. Then now the points for the opponent. 7, 7,
The build up.
5, 6, and 5. And finally the scores for the reviewer. For me, 6, 3, 5, 5, and 5. I'm going to take the list and give them the chance to clarify. So first for the reporter, I don't know, maybe we could start with the highest mark.
Yeah, okay, so I gave 8 this. I just thought you, this is Karen, right? I just thought you gave a really good, you did a really good job of giving a convincing, instinctive explanation of the mechanism of the tuning fork hitting the paper, talking about weak contact. I thought that you had a really convincing comparison between your tracked motion and then your suggested theory. I thought you had made a good attempt at investigating the damping. I liked the way you, your simulations. My big criticism, which is actually my criticism for everyone, was the way that you answered the questions, the jury questions, and also, you know, your opponents and reviewers' questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then maybe that was for the 5.
Oh, I'm on the low side. Okay, so I guess in terms of plenty of my grades, like my question influenced them quite a bit. There is a way to verify whether the impulses or the movement actually are the origin of the sound. And you can do it using only the things you have on your slides. So that's why I even asked about this. It's not like me being an annoying judge and like lecturing you on what an FFT is. On the other hand, like you were almost there, and then one of your team members was like, "No, just delete all the higher order frequency peaks." Sad times, but at least you have any peaks on your graph in comparison to the other guys. That's substantially better. What else? Generally speaking, I was quite happy about the report, but then like you have a complex theory which is fairly non-standard. Like you have an unusual model for the beam instead of going for Euler beam theory, which has been with us on Iypt for like how many generations now, and I don't really see why. So with complex theory, you need there is high scrutiny on the experiments, and that there wasn't much of the experiments in terms of like varying your paper and all that. Yes, so
Okay.
I guess this and the experiments.
Thank you. Then maybe some low and high marks for the opponent. Maybe
Am I
10?
high or
You are a high one.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I thought the report was very novel, and you asked some sharp questions to bring us back to the fundamentals, which is what is the origin of sound production. I think I'm not sure. It seems to me you disagree, and then later on it seems to me that you agree. Maybe it was some terminology and language barriers that did not allow us to really have a fruitful discussion. What I liked about your discussion was also that you actually raised some doubts in me about the simulations that they had. But I thought you could have gone further, because what was novel, I think, about their report was chaos. No one talked about chaos. It kind of avoided it. So, because that's what they claim. So if they claim that, I think it ought to be, without any further detail, I think it ought to be brought up to a discussion either by the opponent or the reviewer.
Just, I'll give you also high marks. The speech was perfect, the ideas were perfect. Let's say perfect, obviously not, but pretty close to that. And I was convinced in the whole stage that you were quite clear about this phenomenon. Great ideas, but on the other hand, in the discussion you were somehow lost and you couldn't explain your ideas. And the discussions in some points, they were just not leading anywhere, so therefore just a 7. But maybe for a 5,
it wasn't just a hook thing at the end, although I was really hoping that you would just give me more of an instinctive thing, like the card would flex and then you would see it being changed in some way. But I agree with Mihai that your speech was really, really good, and that you had some key criticisms that you pointed out, and I think, because I quite liked the report, so I was actually really impressed that you found some really key criticisms there. But I felt that the discussion let you down a bit. Not just that you just once or twice got slightly lost your train of thought, but I felt that you dwelt too much on certain points that you could have just moved on from. So criticizing the animation, which I did agree with, but then I think at that point you'd proven your point, and then you could have just moved on to more criticisms, and so that wasn't such a good use of time. And then similarly, your initial questions, some of them were well chosen and some of them weren't, but then the focus was lacking. For example, I think you asked more than once about the sampling rate of either the camera or the microphone, which I felt wasn't a very relevant point. So in the future, I would reorder your questions so that the key ones are first.
okay, thank you. Then for the review, basically pretty much the same except of a 3.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so I did not like the way you questioned, and when the opponent or reporter tried to clarify, you moved on. So it seemed to me you were not interested in the answer, and therefore not interested in getting the understanding from your colleagues. I actually also deducted marks, half a mark, because of the question by my colleague about the Fourier transform of an impulse train. The Fourier transform of an impulse, the Dirac delta impulse, is this, but if it's an impulse train, the train of impulses, then it's different. Okay. So I thought the understanding was lacking.
Okay, thank you very much.
Could I add
Yeah,
one?
sure, obviously. If you
I gave you a 5, which was right smack dab in the middle. My colleague had one of my comments. Didn't seem like you were terribly interested in the answers that you were getting. And maybe that's true or maybe that's not true, but it seemed like it was a series of questions designed to give a series of questions. The other thing is I didn't feel like your questions were pushing towards a particular goal. Right? It seemed to me like they were questions for the sake of having a question, and they didn't formulate or they didn't factor into the work that you were doing later on quite so well. The other thing is you had some time management issues as you were going through. You spent a lot of time summarizing, and the really interesting stuff where I would have liked to have heard your opinions about, why you thought the opponent was better than the reporter or not. You didn't allow yourself enough time to really let your physics shine there.
Okay, thank you for all of you. Let's say you are free to ask from the jury in the break, obviously. We make kind of a 10 minutes break, so we start at 11.